No, not yet.
All right, good. All right, man. Thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it, man. And I met you, what, like 2 years ago?
Yeah,
I
at the
met you
retreat.
first at the retreat,
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, and ever since then we just kind of clicked. Now, I thought you were funny, and I
Thanks,
thought you
dude.
were interesting, and you're honest.
Yes.
Which is what I like about you is that you're a human being.
Yeah.
You don't try to hide it.
Yep.
So, do you want to introduce yourself
Sure.
and kind of get into what your life looked like before getting sober?
Okay. Yeah, so Alex B, my sober date is February 1st, 2010. My sponsor is Steve C. My home group is the No Name Group, though I am still looking for a solid home group. The No Name Group has been my home group for many, many years.
Yeah.
I have three guys in the book in the steps, but I probably sponsor currently, that call me sponsor, about a dozen guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I my service commitment, since I'm gonna do it like the Knights, is that I don't have one right now. That I'm looking. I go where I need to, but right now, actually, it's not true. I'm chairing in December, so this Saturday, the No Name I chair. I'm splitting it with a sponsee, but unfortunately, the sponsee just went out. So even though he told me last night he wants to chair this Saturday, I may tell him to hold back a bit because he's in his first week.
Right.
So yeah, that's my introduction.
Thanks, man.
Of course. And what it was like, Carlos, let me think. I'll try not to make it too much of a drunkalog or using, but yeah, I'll share a little bit about kind of my upbringing briefly and then really fast forward to, how I got sober and just give some highlights because there's a lot of stuff. Carlos and I met this morning for coffee and we got a chance to just catch up before we did this. And I will tell you that I've shared like half the shit that I already could be sharing now. So, first of all, I was born in LA and born to a Mexican mom and a gringo dad. Moved to Arizona in the mid 70s, then stayed here until the early 70s, late 80s. So my drug addiction, alcoholism, believe it or not, did not start early. I didn't start drinking at a young age. I didn't start using. I started using steroids in my mid-teens, and I found out later in recovery from counselors that steroids count.
Right.
Because, it changes the way I feel. But I was exposed to alcoholism early. My dad was a hard drinker. He would come home every night and either fight with my mom or attack my mom or attack us. He was a very violent drunk. He also would have numerous affairs, so I constantly was going from one house to another, just getting separated, whether it was mom leaving, taking me and my brother. I have one brother who's 5 years younger. And I fast forward through this though, but it has some relevance, because I learned early how not to have a relationship. My mom and dad both started going out on each other. So, we live in an area where I saw a lot of this as a young kid just down the street, where my mom would take me to a bar called the Priceless Inn. I was like 5 or 6 years old. She would have me go in and get my dad because she wouldn't go in there. And I'd go in there, my dad'd be talking to this blonde. I'll always forget, it was just one blonde. Turned out that was one of the girls that he was having an affair with. And I would have to yank on him, and then my dad would come out, yell at my mom. And, you're seeing all this young kid, and obviously it's just not normal.
Right, yeah.
So fast forward in 1979, my dad picked up me and my brother, and out of the blues, he got us in a car, and we went back east without my mom. And I was like, what's going on, man? And I didn't know what, I just went with the flow. My dad just said, your mom will meet us out in Virginia later. We got to Delaware where my grandma lives, his mom, and I eavesdropped one time on him talking to my grandma. I was like 10 at the time. And I put two and two together that my mom was seeing a man out here and may or may not come out to see us. She eventually did, and they patched up and they got back together, but it was still tumultuous. It was still the same old shit. All through my teenage years, I went to high school in Virginia. I had a really violent temper. That's one thing I will share about my beginnings. I noticed early on I could not contain my anger, man. I got in a lot of fights. I broke a lot of lips. I remember kicking this guy's braces in because I lost a freaking backyard football game. And I'm like 13 years old, you know. My dad's like, "What's the matter with you?" And I, didn't know. And I later had a high school girlfriend who came out with me to ASU. I walked on football at ASU. That'll be something I'll share here in a second. But she was my high school girlfriend, really starting young. And again, wasn't drinking yet, wasn't using drugs, but I had a lot of jealousy. I was very, very jealous, very envious. It came very quickly. There's a story I want to share that's relevant to the anger because it says in the big book, that resentment's our number one offender. Why? Because I think it leads to anger for a lot of us, and it did for me. So this particular time, I was graduating from high school, and my girlfriend at the time was 1 year younger than me, so she was a junior, and my nana and all my Mexican cousins and my tias were coming out from Arizona. Right. So I take my primo Jaime James with me to go pick her up, and we were cheating on each other. How funny, that I learned the best from my parents. And I knew she was having a relationship, but I wasn't doing any good either. And long and short is, I confronted her with my cousin in the room, and everyone, by the way, is waiting back at our house for this party. Right. And she's lying to me, and I know it, and I proceed to hit her in the face. Oh, wow. Yeah, dude. I remembered I hit her right here. She was in the back seat. She wouldn't come out because I wanted to have it privately with her, the conversation. And she refused. She wanted to be in the car with my cousin. And I think part of it was she feared me. I had a temper. And I'd never hit her before, but I'd pushed her and grabbed her and did things I'm not proud of. But when I hit her, it cut her eye. And I remember my cousin looked at me. I'll never forget that look. He was like, "What did you just do, bro?" Yeah. Blood started coming down her face. And I remembered at the time I could proceed forward. She got out then and then ran, but I got her back in the car. I'm hyperventilating. I'm not knowing what's going on. And I'm like, okay, if we proceed forward, my nana, I mean, you know how it is as a Mexicano, man. Your nana sees this, I'm in trouble. My mom, my dad, all my uncles, all my aunts on both sides were there. And I'm like, oh, shoot. And then I thought if I go back, her dad is who she lived with. And her dad owned a lot of guns. And I thought, that dude will kill me. Right, yeah. So I decided to proceed forward. I remembered we got her eye patched up. She didn't need stitches, at least at the time, but it was a pretty bad cut right on her cheekbone. And, man, you talk about the beginnings of self-loathing and just total embarrassment and shame that ran through me. And I felt it. And I wasn't using. I was on steroids. I found out later that was using. I wasn't drinking or getting high. And I walk into that party. First person, of course, is my nana that catches, and she sees her eye, and she says, of course, in Spanish, what happened? And I tell her back, oh, we were playing sports with Jaime, throwing the football, and she missed. And she knew I was lying, dude. She looked at me, and she said, mentiroso, man. And I was like, okay. And then the rest of it. And I share that story because later on, I had a chance of making amends with that woman, and I'll share if we talk about it why. But so what happened? How did I finally start getting into my alcoholism and drug abuse? So I came to ASU in 1989. I walked on football. The reason why I was a better baseball player and actually had scholarships, but I was following the same girl who I had abused. We were still dating. It was a very sick relationship, and she wanted to come to Arizona for some reason. And I knew Arizona. I was like, well, that's where my family's from. It's where I lived when I was a kid. My mom from there. Sure, okay, let's do it. And she said, why don't you try to play baseball there? And I said, well, I played football too. And I had been grown up or gotten big from the steroids. So I walked on. I made the team. It was pretty cool. Got to play for a couple years. She and I soon broke up after that. But then I was introduced to marijuana. And I will get through most of this early stuff quickly, Carlos, because I know. Okay, we're still good? So here's the thing I learned right away. I love getting high, bro. Okay, so a little backdrop. That same girl that I had physically abused, emotionally, mentally, and physically, she started smoking dope when I was a freshman in college. She was still a senior. I went to a small college in Virginia. I remember coming back and finding that out, and I was so mad at her. I took that dope and I flushed it down the toilet. I was like embarrassed for her and called her a drug addict, and who knows. And here I am thinking, laughing at that, because then when I had a taste of what dope felt like, dude, it was on like Donkey Kong, bro. I was a dope fiend. I smoked marijuana morning to night. I was the type of guy with the college guys back at ASU in the day where, if we go out to bars back in the in Scottsdale, Tempe, um, right up the street. And I remembered I would get high with my friends, and then they would get a couple hits off the bong, and they were ready to go. Let's go, bro. Let's go chase the women. Let's go hang out at the bars. And I go, okay, yeah. I'll meet you there. We'll go to separate cars. They'd go out, let's just say it's 8, 9 o'clock at night. They'd come back at 2 in the morning. My ass is still in the same chair, high as a kite, bunch of food around me, playing video games with 2 other guys. And I remembered in that first couple years, one of my friends, Joe Serrano, looked at me and said, bro, why do you always have to get high so much? Like, just one hit like me and go. And I couldn't answer him. I didn't know what that answer was other than I liked it and I wanted more. And it almost felt like, and this is when my alcoholism started, one was never enough, The obsession and the physical allergy had come in, or in this case, the allergy and the obsession, but I didn't know what any of that meant. I just thought I liked to get high. And it says, as you know, in the doctor's opinion, we use essentially because the effect produced by alcohol. So I share that story because that's relevant, because that's why I'm a convicted felon. So I am a convicted felon. Hello, everyone. I have it expunged. I got arrested not once, not twice, but 3 times with marijuana. So here then became the problems, right? First it was getting high and it works good. But then I started dealing it. I dealt it in large quantities. My wife told me later, you're not a good drug dealer. you're freaking 2 for 3 getting busted. And after that, I kind of learned my lesson. But to fast forward, I eventually started getting to drinking. I got my I was telling Carlos some stories about living in this area right here where I was partying, different jobs. It took me a long time to get graduated from college. Real quickly, moved to New York in 1994 when I was 25, your age. I lived there for about a year, nearly overdosed and died on cocaine when I was in New York City. This is when I think it really started to become what it led to. Was now I was willing to do anything. I was doing coke, I was doing glass, I was doing biker's crank, I was still smoking dope. The reason why the dope started leaving my life, for those who are marijuana users, is I started getting real bad anxiety and started getting paranoia. You know what I mean? A lot of us who long-term users, they start getting that. So drinking stuff. So I remember coming back and I would get really bad panic attacks. I'd constantly make my mom take me to the hospital. Never putting 2 and 2 together. That could be the amount of marijuana you're smoking or the drugs that are in your system. But I still couldn't put 2 and 2 together. And then every time I'd go to the doctor and they'd say, no, you're not having a heart attack. You're having a panic attack. I didn't know what that meant. Right. So why did I start liking drinking? Well, because drinking obviously is more of a depressant. And I could do the same amount but not get so much up. And so I got my first DUI in 1996. Once I came back, finally graduated from ASU in 1996 as well. My second one in 1999. The woman who I met when I came back from New York, I eventually married. We both lived right up the street. In fact, I met her at the Bashes on McClintock and Warner, which is just right up the way, if you know where I'm talking about. And we married, got a DUI in 1999, and then got divorced less than 2 years after being married. Oh, wow. So I do want to get close. So you asked what it was like, because obviously you can see it wasn't going well. Right. My jobs were up and down. My drug use, at this point I had 2 DUIs. I got divorced, and now I was homeless. Now we're talking 2002. I had no place to go. We had a place just literally down the street on McClintock and Baseline across from McClintock High School. And she was like, good luck. I had no money. I just lost a job at Nauman Hobbs. I called my parents up in Pine Top, and I asked them if I could come live with them. They knew I was very destructive, but they were like, yeah, you can come live with us. But there are going to be some rules. Right. And one of them is you can't be using in our house. You can't drink. Well, I immediately broke that rule. I got a job as a bartender and started using up in Pine Top. Yeah. But that's where I met my love of today, Amanda. I met her. She was working at the bar in 2002. We started dating. In 2003, we moved from Pine Top, Arizona to Sunnyvale, California, which is the Silicon Valley of Silicon Valley or Northern California. That year in 2003, I proceeded to get 2 more DUIs back to back. I served 6 months in jail for that. I should have gotten more.
Right.
But a little tidbit to this, how I like to manipulate and use people. So my wife worked at a Starbucks. I call her my wife now. Back then, she was my girlfriend. And she actually was pregnant. So she also got pregnant within the first year with me. And which is now our daughter, who's 19, on her way to be 20. And where her Starbucks was that she worked, all the cops, the judges, and the lawyers would go there to get their coffee before they went to the courthouse. So on my second DUI, I got arrested, ironically, by the same cop within the 6 months. And the reason why he knew it was me is because I still had Arizona plates on my car. So here I am in front of the judge. I prop Amanda right in front of me with her pregnant stomach. And I tell the judge that I promise I'll get well. And Carlos, he looks right at me like I'm looking at you, and he says, you know what, I feel sorry for you. And I said, why? And he goes, because I know what you're doing. You're using her, so I'll give you a lenient sentence. And he says, sadly, I think I'm going to fall for this, he said, because you should get 1.5 years. I'm going to give you 6 months. And if you do good time, because it was a work furlough program, you can be out in 90 days in 3 months. And he said, but the only reason why I'm going to do this is, he said, because, and I'm almost like literally verbatim telling you what he said to me. He said, the only reason why I'm doing this is because I believe in you, and I think that you will get well for that child. And, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
I will say this. Drunks and drug addicts always say they're going to get sober, right, when you have a kid. Nope. Or when something big's going to happen, like that job, and it says in the big book, that guy's got something to meet, and he goes the other way. At the Knights Retreat this past weekend, Carlos, the guy was talking, and this is why it strikes a chord. The main speaker that night was a guy named Tommy. He's a circuit speaker, great speaker, you guys, if you ever want to hear him. And anyways, there's this part that just hit me right here. That's why I'm emotional, where he said he was coming out of a rehab here in Gilbert back in 2001. And his kids flew in from Colorado, his young kids back then, and his wife. And he looked at them, and the therapist is telling him, this is what you have to live for. Right. And he's like, you're right, you're right. Actually, it was in Tucson. And so after all that great family therapy, he says when he's speaking to us this past Saturday, he says he's getting on the bus to come from Tucson back to Phoenix to get on a plane to go to Colorado. And he sees a Dos Equis or whatever, a Heineken in the bus depot chiller, right? You know where this is going, bro. And he looks at it. He knows better. He's got 30 days sober. He's going to go home. He's going to be with his family. He just had great family therapy. And he decides to celebrate those 30 days with a Heineken. And instead of proceeding forward to Phoenix, he ends up in Tijuana for 10 days. But the story but what he then says that got everyone very emotional is he said he gets a phone call about 2 days later from his wife, maybe even not even that, a day later. And she's like, where the hell are you? Why aren't you on the plane right here? Back then they didn't have technology like Life 360 where they could find you. So he's like, I messed up. She's like, yeah, we thought you did. And she goes, well, I want you to know, and it was right around Christmas time because he got sober around this time. Right. She goes, well, I want you to know your daughter's waiting for you. Sorry. He said, she's been sitting outside saying, I know Dad means it this time. Because I could see it in his eyes. He really is coming here. And she said, she keeps going outside and checking for you, and you're not coming. I got to tell her the truth. And he said, tell her I'm not coming. And, it hit home because, bro, I had to use for another. So my daughter was born. I'll move forward now in 2004. I ended up getting out of jail. My wife was still pregnant. Back then, my girlfriend picked me up. We drove, packed everything, came to Arizona. And in 2004, I didn't get sober to 2010. So I had 6 more years of this shit. 6 more years of drinking. I didn't get any more DUIs, and I didn't get arrested, but I got hardcore into crystal meth. I probably overdosed 3 more times from at least 3 that I can think of. One in particular where my wife came with my young baby and then my older daughter. She was barely 3. or 4 to a Super 8 right here on Chandler Boulevard, where they didn't think I was going to make it, and that's why she came, and I did. You know, one of the things I want to share is the next year my daughter was born, who's going to be 19, bro. And I remembered my wife asked me to watch her, and again, I'm in and out, right? And I told her I promise I'm going to stay sober this time, and she had to go into an emergency delivery, and I was hungover. That's the first thing. I was embarrassed, and I get there and I put on the scrubs. And it was a very hard thing. My wife nearly died in the delivery. She had to have an emergency C-section. My daughter, though, had the cord tied around her neck. It was not a good thing. But when I had a chance to babysit this beautiful girl, to my point about all this emotions, I remembered I was like, I'm going to do it this time. I was going to AA. I'd get 2 weeks, go out. I never got more than a month ever through all this, okay? And I started coming regularly about 1999 when I got that second DUI to AA. And I remembered my wife, we needed to have money, and I had a job. She took a job at night working for the Arizona Republic selling subscriptions while she was going to college at ASU. And I remember, bro, and I'm not going to get emotional in this because I've made right with God, but I remembered I would drink trying to watch my baby. And we're talking 2-3 months old, bro. And I remember putting her up on a couch like this. We had an apartment like this in North Scottsdale. And I remembered I would make my rum and cokes, and I would tell her, okay, Mija, you guys start getting ready to go to sleep. And my whole goal was to get her asleep so I could drink.
Right, yeah.
And I can't tell you how often I would get mad at her, a 3-month-old child, literally mad, like yelling at her because she would not go to sleep so I could drink. And the shame in that, the ability to say, like, what was more important, my disease, my alcoholism. And so after a couple times when my wife came home and I was passed on a different couch while my baby's sitting here fucking going on one of those things that go like this, and she's crying, she had enough. She said, I can't trust you anymore. I can't trust you with the child. She was going to leave me, and I had a rage out one night, broke everything in the apartment. She left with her sister, and I went to TLC for 90 days. And we all know TLC over in Mesa. And that was the longest I ever stayed sober, bro. In 2004, my daughter was 6 months old. I stayed sober the entire 90 days. I got a sponsor. I started on the steps. I soon relapsed, and it continued. I will say this before we end, though, kind of what it was like, because I had to paint a little bit of a picture of this up and down. That, my second daughter, when she was born in 2008. She's now 15, just turned 15 in November. That was the hardest time because that's when crystal meth got really bad. It was drinking, but I was on the streets a lot. We mentioned Ray. I won't mention his last name, Ray P. But Ray, I can't tell you, numerous times rescued me from the streets. One particular time, this is kind of funny, I'm butt naked on Main Street outside a bar called Groggy's. For any of those drug addicts know where Groggy's at, right on Main Street. Hiring a kite, been up 3 days. He comes, he picks me up. He finds me a towel or some clothes or something, takes me straight to Chandler Valley Hope. And that was in 2007. And I still didn't get sober for another 3 years. So there was a lot, man. I think in the end, we'll probably talk about what happened. And I'm going to wait on that and tell you how I got sober.
If you want to...
We want me to roll right into it? All right, man. So what happened, so my daughter is born. My wife is pretty much done at this point. She's still not my wife. So now I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, a 1-year-old daughter, born in 2008. I got a new sponsor in Steve C. And again, in and out, bro, not putting any time together. The most ever was that 90 days back in 2004. And, there's a lot of things, bro, that I can tell you that happened from some good stuff, but none of it miraculously ever came to fruition. I could regurgitate the big book. I can't tell you how many times, real quickly, people would come to me after I got a 24-hour chip, and they would say, wow, I can't believe you have a 24-hour chip. I thought you had like 3 years. And I used to think that was an honor when they would tell me that. Like, wow, man, look at you. I go out and have cigarettes with the guys. Meanwhile, I got 24 hours, thinking that's not really a compliment, bro. Like, if you look at it, it means you're not only fooling everyone else, you're fooling yourself. You know, a guy used to tell me over and over as I was a constant relapser that one of these days you got to be your own narc. And for anyone who has trouble being honest with themselves, that's so true, because when you think about it, what he meant, it's not what I tell Carlos, it's not what I tell my sponsor, or it's not even what I may tell my girlfriend. It's what am I telling myself? Because we always know that internal voice is telling you everything you want to know. And when he said be your own narc, what he meant back then was tell on yourself. And I remembered when he told me that, there were many times I wanted to tell on myself, but I just didn't have the willpower to do it. I didn't know how to do it, or the truth is maybe I just wasn't done and didn't want to do it. There was one particular time Ray was sponsoring me, and I really didn't want to drink, man. I thought I could move forward. We were in the steps. I think we even had just done my 5th step. Right. So I had probably about 2 months, maybe a month at least. And I was right outside the liquor store. And he goes, bro, are you outside a liquor store? And I'm at Circle K right now. Don't go in, man. Don't go in. And I knew I was already going to go in, Carlos. Yeah. And this telling on myself wasn't enough, because even though I made that phone call and told him, yeah, I'm outside a liquor store, it was that internal self that could have said, but I need to go to a meeting. And that's what my mind kept saying. No, you don't need to just call your sponsor. You need to get your ass to a meeting, right, and then another meeting and another meeting. But instead, I remember I got off the phone with Ray and I went right in and I got drunk. And it was just because all the time, you know, it says again, we drink essentially because the effect produced by alcohol, unless we can have this spiritual experience, this psychotic change, or psychic change, not psychotic. I am psychotic, but I need a psychic change. Yeah. So what happened, man? So I got a new sponsor in Steve C., who's still my sponsor today. He's been my sponsor for 15 years, even though I'm coming up on 14 years sober. And a real quick story, but dude, this is where God comes in a lot. So I would go to meetings in Mesa, like the Mesa Olano Club. I would go to Bloopers still sometimes. Most of my meetings were in Gilbert at this point. Right. So I'm coming up on my 5th step with my sponsor. I got a 1.5-year-old daughter. I got a daughter that's under 5, and I'm thinking I'm doing okay. But again, for the millionth time, I had a chance of telling myself, and I didn't. I got this urge, as we know it is, that obsession came, that thought of wanting to use. And I remembered my 5th step was going to be that Saturday, and I started already those lies. For anyone that knows what I'm talking about, every time I wanted to use, the lie machine started. Like, how can I start to spin up these stories, right? Yeah. Stories that just come out of nowhere. Yeah. And I mean stories that have no connection. And so the weekend prior, I was on the west side where my wife's family lived. So I was going to tell my sponsor I had to go back to the west side again. Right. And then why? I had to think why. Like, there are all these things I had to think about. And so here came the story. Now, none of it, of course, was being translated to my wife. I mean, I wasn't telling her any of this. This was already starting with me. So I called my sponsor and I said, hey, I think we may need to move our 5th step. And he said, why? And I said, well, because I need to go to the west side with my wife. And he said, didn't you just go with her last weekend? So, okay, here comes the next slide. Yeah, but there's something up with her mom and she just needs me there. Well, what does that have to do with anything? You have her go, you support her by the phone, you do your 5th step. Your sobriety's got to come first, man. And I was like, yeah, and it was a yeah, but. There was always a yeah, but. Like, this dude ain't letting me off the hook. If he would just understand, I got to go get high. Yeah. Now, I'm not even getting the drugs yet, man, and I'm getting blocked by all these answers, and I'm just answered with some BS justification of it. And it always goes back to what everyone had always said. The minute you start putting anything above AA, you will lose it. And I was already starting to put stuff above God and above recovery. And that's where the lying came. So what happened was I gave up on trying to sell this story out to my sponsor. He wasn't buying it. Yeah. He hung up by telling me, I'll see you at 9 o'clock on Saturday. Goodbye. And that was it. So I proceed to where I know to buy my stuff in Mesa. And I go to the McDonald House, which is across the street from TLC. Something funny I found out later, a bunch of Knights were taking meetings into the TLC across the way, and they saw me going on to the other side, the drug house side, and they called Ray and said, hey, bro, I think we saw your boy Alex over at the, oh, what's he doing? Is he taking in a meeting over at, no, he's on the other side of the tracks, bro. He's heading in the wrong direction. And I remember Ray calling me like, hey, mother, what are you doing over there? And of course I didn't take the call. But where God came in is there was this guy named Kerry who had really bright white hair. Can't miss him. He was part of the Mesa Olano Club, and ironically, he was managing that facility. And when I walked in, he's right there. And I knew exactly where my drug dealer was, but he caught me before I could get to his apartment. And he says, what are you doing here, bro? You're confused? He goes, the meeting house is over there. And I said, no, bro, Kerry, I'm not here for that. And he said, really? And he says, okay. He says, you want to talk about it? And I was like, oh, man. I was like, no, not really. Again, kind of like that phone call in that parking lot. When my mind's made up, there's nothing you can say. He said, well, you don't have to do this. And he said, who are you looking for? Fat Rob? I said, yeah, I'm looking for Fat Rob. That was his nickname. He was a big guy. He said, well, you don't live here no more. He moved. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So that's like 2 strikes. You got Carrie's killing my buzz. Rob is gone. Yeah. So I ain't giving up though, bro. So real quickly I go, where'd he move to, Carrie? I don't want to tell you, bro. And he goes, I'm going to find out. He goes, I know you will. So I get in the car, and I'm pissed. I go back in, and I said, where does he live? He goes, let me tell you this much. I'll tell you what apartment kind. And I said, I knew right away. I go, was it like this? It was just down the street on McDonald across the tracks right before you get to Broadway. And he goes, yeah, that's it. I said, okay. And he goes, dude, he looked right at me. I'll never forget. Like, this is God, bro. And he goes, you don't have to do this, man. You can go to a meeting. I'll go with you. I'll get someone to fill in my spot. And for any of those people that deny me, man, just remember that there were so many people that told me as a relapser that I keep playing with fire and eventually I'll get burned for good. And what they meant was, you can come in and out of AA, and yeah, Carlos will still love you. Alex will still love you. The gals in that meeting will still love you. But that doesn't mean that door won't get shut and you'll never get brought back in. We know fentanyl's killing right now. You can die in drinking too much. You can die in an accident. And what this guy told me a long time ago is he said that window will shut because you're taking advantage of what is freely being given to you by God, and that's another chance at sobriety. How many chances before no more chances? And I remember that came back to me when Carrie said, you can go with me. And I said no. So I went straight to that apartment complex. I guessed what apartment it was because it used to be the same one I used to go with Fat Rob. And sure enough, there he is. That's where he was living. I go in, I get high with him. It's still Friday night. He gives me some more dope and I take it home. By then, my wife and my 2 kids had left to the west side because she never liked to be in the house when she knew I'd bring drugs home. Right. And I wasn't feeling good. I felt like something was wrong with the dope. And I honestly felt like I was going to die or something. So I went to the hospital. Sure enough, I was on my way to having a stroke. They brought me in. I got care, and I was released that Saturday. That next day, now, of course, I've skipped on my 5th step, not taking calls from my sponsor. The next day, I go in to go look for the dope that I'd thrown at the bottom of the trash. And I find it, and I do the rest of it, and the same reaction happened again. I started not feeling good, but this time I couldn't even drive myself. This time, a neighbor, ironically, right across the street where I lived in Gilbert, was outside watering his lawn when he saw me stumbling across, and he said, are you okay? And I said, can you just take me to the hospital? I don't think I'm going to make it. He, of course, didn't know why. He thought I was just having a heart attack or something. Puts me in his car, takes me to the same hospital, which happened to be right behind our house. Right. Some of the same nurses from the night before are there. They bring me in, and this is how I'll close. I remembered he's not one of us, but he's sitting behind me, and they're pumping me full of whatever so, they can take out the drugs. And I never thought you could die from meth. I knew cocaine, I knew heroin, obviously we know fentanyl now. I didn't even know meth was laced. This is 2010. This is January 31st, the night of, okay? Right. And I remembered I said, Leb, he was a Lebanese man, and I said, Leb, you can go, bro. And he was sitting behind me. I remember he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, I'm not going anywhere. He goes, I'm here for you. That was God. I believe it to this day. I woke up from whatever drugs they gave me that morning, and I haven't used since. It was February 1st, 2010. I remembered I looked around, I asked where my neighbor was, they said he had left. Several years later, bro, I will tell you in closing that for this part, I was curious about what it was like the night before my last drug after trying to get sober for really trying to get sober for over 15 years.
Right.
And it finally stuck. And I asked my wife, I was brushing my teeth, I was coming up on like 4 years sober, and I said, do you remember the night before I got sober? I've never asked anybody other than I don't remember much. And she said, yeah, I remember. She goes, I called the hospital because you weren't answering your phone. I figured you were back in that same hospital, and you were. And the nurse said, yeah, we have an Alex Boggs here. And she said, can I talk to him? And he says, well, he can't talk right now. We have him strapped to the bed. And she goes, strapped to the bed? What's going on? Nurse said, no, it's fine. He's not violent. He just won't stop crying. Now, I don't remember any of this, bro. So he goes, what do you mean? He goes, he's just very emotional. And he just got to the point where we just had to strap him down because he just, between the drugs, then the drugs were giving him. All I can relate to is like what Bill W. talked about, that moment, of whatever, a bright light. And I'm not saying some aliens came down on me. All I know is I don't remember what I don't remember. But whatever happened, that was the physical part, I think, of the first time of ever finally surrendering to something. And I do believe God was there, and God wanted me to finally be done. There's a lot more to it, but that was the last time that I used was that night. And the next morning was February 1st, 2010, and I haven't used since.
Man, dude, I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
And that's a really in-depth story, man, and it's so awesome to hear that, right? And I'm just glad that you're here with us,
Yeah.
that you're not dead,
Yes, me too.
So after getting sober, how did the steps look like for you?
Okay.
Like what did they, how did they make you feel? What was your overall experience with the 12 steps, like actually doing them, and how did that light click for you, that psychic change?
Yes.
That
Yes.
spiritual experience, how did that look like for you? And also, how did your faith look like before and after?
Whew.
How did your relationship with God and all of that
Yeah.
look like? I know that was a lot, but
So I'll answer it this way, Carlos, first. When I was your age, when I was 25, I had overdosed of cocaine in Manhattan. And, I passed out, as they say, but I think I was on my way to dying. I had had a heart attack, or I don't think it was a heart attack because the doctor would have told me, but they rushed me to the hospital. The roommate at the time wasn't there.
right.
But I remembered there was this gorda black woman.
Yeah.
But she had this way about her, and she was cleaning me off and humming this song. Here I am, 25 years old. I'll never forget. And I said, where am I? I thought I had died. And she said, I want you to know that everything will be okay. I think that was my first introduction, bro, to knowing God would always be there for me as long as I just kept sticking around. So I answer that my faith had never left me, I don't think, through all my drug use, bro, and all my drinking, honestly. I believe that God was always there because I remembered, I said, but what happened? And she never said, oh, you came in here for drugs and you're a cocaine addict. And no, she just hummed this song and she was just cleaning me with a sponge and just trying to just make me feel like everything's going to be okay. Now, this is in 1994, bro. I didn't get sober for 16 more years and all that stuff I just shared. But I think at that moment, even when I was a child, through all the stuff that I remember I'd run away when my life was hard, as I shared, getting brought up.
Right.
To my Nana's house, I remember I would go back with her when she would pray. So I was always seeking. And as was said this weekend, we always seek, but when do we finally let in?
Right.
When do we accept?
Exactly. Yeah.
When do we say? There's a difference between seeking and letting in. So obviously that day when she was giving me that sponge bath, it gave me this feeling that he was there. But to answer your question, and I love how you asked it, it took me 2 weeks before I got to my home group. after that overdose in January 31st, not February 1st, 2010. I remember, like a lot of us relapsers, I went to different meetings. So I went to Chandler GIT on the Saturday morning. What's the book that we read in AA that has all the articles and stuff? What is it?
Pipeline?
No. You know the book that you read that comes monthly? And it has AA stories. Sorry, guys, I remember it. It'll come to Grapevine.
Oh,
Yeah, the Grapevine.
I don't know that.
Yeah, you're young, but it's a good one, dude. That most of it's online now. You don't see a lot of it in publication because of the way that we do paper now. Most of it's online, but it was a Grapevine meeting. I got my 24-hour chip, was still sober. The following week, I went to my home group, and this is my point, though, of Sharon going back to '94. And how I know God was always with me. Lots of other stories I could tell you that I know we all have where, shit, I'm not dead. And I would always say, thank you, Right. Then I'd go get high. But how you asked, and then I'm going to get to the steps, but how faith. So I finally see my sponsor for the first time, and my grand sponsor. I'm at my home group at Page a Day. And Page a Day is a circle meeting, and person speaks, next person, and it's usually on what we read. And it comes to me, and I just did that. Here we go, that cool pride, ego, look at me, quoted probably a couple things out of the big book, yet I barely had 2 weeks sober, right? So my sponsor comes up to me after the meeting, and he's crying. He's mad, but like mad cry. I look at him, I'm like, what's going on? He just says, you're never going to get this, are you? Never going to get this. And he walks away. I was like, what the hell's the matter with that mother? Get over yourself, bro. So then my grand sponsor comes up, though, and this is what happened, man. He starts yelling at me, and he's like, how can you, after 2 weeks sober, sit in front of your peers, your fellowship, and tell them everything's fine? And talk about like you've been here for 2 years. He says, when are you finally going to get honest? When are you finally going to let go? When are you going to finally surrender? Right? And all I kept hearing was letting go and surrender and getting honest and telling on yourself. Like this bullshit of 2 weeks and I'm fine. Dude, you nearly died 2 weeks ago. Why can't we hear about that? Why can't we hear about instead you're trying to fit in with this group? And then he wouldn't let me go. I'm going down the hallway. I'm trying to get to work. It's already 8 a.m. And he's just on my ass, in my face. What I basically can tell you, looking back at it, it was the first time that someone had finally not taken my shit anymore and got in my face and called me on it. We always like to say in AA, there's a good cop, bad cop, right? We always go to the people in AA when we're having struggle if we want to hear what we want to hear. Right. Hey, bro, I'm having this problem with my girl, and you find the friends that are going to agree with you. Right. He was one of those dudes that wasn't going to agree with me. And let me tell you, find those people because they'll save your ass. And so he was that guy that was not agreeing with me. He was mad at me. He was telling me I'm full of shit. He was telling me this. He was telling me that. He was telling me let go, surrender, all this stuff. And so I get in my car, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, I don't know what just happened. So I'm like, man, I go to work. Well, that Saturday, this was that Friday morning, that Saturday, my wife was still very hesitant about running errands because at this point, I got 2 weeks sober, and, I'm going to go out drinking. So here we go, fast forward. I said, well, I think I'm going to be okay. I'd already went to a meeting that morning. Well, dude, she calls me later that day, and she wants to come home with the girls, and I'm sober. I'd done what I said. I was working on the house. I think I was doing laundry. I was doing what I always intended 1,000 times prior to that. But every time when she would leave, bro, I'd already have booze in the trunk, or I'd run out and go get some. And then by the time she called me at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, I was already toasted. And by then, now that I'm loaded, I'm already off to go get drugs and whatnot. And I remember she said, do you realize something as I'm about to get off the phone with her? I go, what? She goes, this is the first time ever that I've called you and you're not drunk on a Saturday. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. So I remembered I called my sponsor and I wanted more because I think it finally, like that obsession was gone from alcohol. Right. So I think it was a combination. My sponsor says now, and I say it to new guys, that it's a series of surrenders. But that first step, that number one step, that one we got to get 100% is to be honest. and when we're honest to the depths of our own being, not to our friend, not to our nana, to our mom, to our girlfriend, to our kids, to ourselves, that we are done. And I still don't know if I ever really came out. When I came out of that hospital, Carlos, I don't remember saying, "Oh, I'm done." Dude, I'd overdosed plenty of times. This is just another one. Even when I got my 24-hour chip, I don't know if I was done. By the way, I still have my 24-hour chip. I'm going to show it to you in a minute. I carry it around. The same 24-hour chip I got almost 14 years later, I still have right now with me, because it's the only one that matters. And then even to that home group, but it was that grand sponsee of mine and my sponsor in combination, both of them, saying surrender, and then a series of surrenders after that. So I remembered I called my sponsor and I said, "I want more of this." And I told him I need to tell you what happened. And so we got together and I told him, and he said, "Okay." And so we got started on the steps. By then, if you remember now, I was already about to do step 5 when I not overdosed, but yeah, almost overdosed. So we went back to step 1. We obviously went through 1, 2, 3 kind of quickly. He wanted to get me into that, into my inventory.
Yeah.
So I did my inventory. The steps went well. I had done 2 prior 5th steps, so what was going to be different this time? Well, I'll lead and get to the question that you asked this way, because then I went on to 6 and 7. I remember 8, 9 was phenomenal. By then I was around 6 months sober, and I knew I had a chance at this point. Here's why. I go to Laguna Beach with my family to meet my sponsor, and he has a house there, or he had a condo. And I remembered he was waiting with me with a card with my 6-month chip. And I remembered when he gave it to me, bro, that's when I realized that I really do have a shot at this. Like, my whole life, I had never come close to 6 months. 90 days at TLC, but I went out like a week later.
Right.
And as we all know, when that obsession leaves us, this is when I believe that the psychic change started happening. I wasn't at this 12th step yet, but I had surrendered something for real and had given it to God. Right. I had finally realized at some point I wanted you to take care of me now, not me. Right. I finally realized I was willing to listen to you and not me. There was this kind of reverse thought that worked for me that never did before, because I always knew better. No matter how much you may share something really cool or someone else did in an AA meeting, I was still thinking about how I could make that my own. Mm-hmm. And I think the psychic change and that shift, even before we get to that 12th step, is that time to finally let that guard down and let people in, for me at least. Right. It was a guard I had up tight, bro, and there was nobody coming in. Yeah. And they talk about how we have to chisel away at that to get into that ego and that pride, and that was starting to happen. And that sunlight of the spirit was coming in, man. And I remember sitting with my sponsor on the beach. I was about to do my amends. I had the list out. I had 6 months sober. And I remember him just looking at me, and I said, "You know what? I think I can do this." And I said, but I still was a smartass, because I looked at him, and I'm going to give you 6 more fucking months. And if I don't like this, though, I'm going to get high. And he said, "Then I will be happy to give you your chip back." And I said, "All right." But I knew I was on to something, is my point. So I will tell you a little bit about the amends, because God was in this. Because I had to talk about the faith, and I think the faith came to me. A lot of people say they don't get that burning bush. I got that burning bush in 94, man, when I overdosed, because I felt God was around. But like I had said earlier, but doesn't mean that just because he's around that I was asking him to come into my life. It was more of, you know what I mean? Yeah. So now I get to the amends, and there's a couple highlights I want to share. Obviously, I made amends to my wife and my kids, even though they were young. I want to say this on camera. I think I'm going to do another amends. I'm trying to work through this with my sponsor right now, but I want to do them now that they're grown women. I got a 15-year-old and now a 19-year-old, soon to be 20. Right. And even though they've seen their dad praying all the time and going to meetings and part of his program and being at retreats these last couple months, it's just something I'm trying to work through with him. Right. So I did it when they were babies, though. They vaguely remember it. My wife, my ex-wife, some ex-workers, or bosses. A big one was my Teal. He was on his deathbed, and I will always remember this. This is the only one I'll share that means a lot. Guys in the meeting, Ray was someone I went and did an amends to, or Ray, sorry. But I remembered my uncle got sick quick. He got pancreatic cancer and like within 8 months. I remember kneeling in his bed, just holding his hand and telling him how much I appreciate him because he was always there, especially during my 20s when I was doing a lot of what I was sharing. But now I'm sober, and I got about 2 years with him sober. And I remembered he just looked at me and he said, "Mijo," he said, "you're a good father. You're a good husband." He said, "But most importantly, you're on track. You know, you're doing good." He didn't know nothing about AA. He just saw something different in me.
Right.
He
Yeah.
felt something different. And he said, "So you just keep doing what you're doing." And you know what? Sometimes those simple words, he didn't have to give me some elaborate, saying. It was just like, just keep doing what you're doing. And
Right.
I did. I kept doing what I was doing. Real quickly, I did 90-90. I remember I got a home group, just like was asked of me. I got a service commitment. My home group was really small. We only had about 10 of us. But
Right.
I volunteered to start bringing coffee because they had never had coffee.
Mm.
So I bought a couple of coffee things with their money at Walmart. I would do decaf and regular. Then I was pissed off because there were times when I didn't want to go to the meeting. We had 3 a week, and my wife would yell at me, "You got to bring those Gavrones coffee." And I'd be like, "Damn it." But then that made sense. Like, now I know why I'm obligated because now I got to go.
Right.
And all these things that started to also matter. All these things my sponsor said: pick a home group, get a service commitment. Hadn't started sponsoring guys yet. But right around my 11th step, when I was starting to get into 12, I found my first sponsee. And I will tell you, and wait for some more questions, that was beautiful. His name was Mark. Ironically, he was Latino like us. He was from Chicago. And sadly, he died from this disease. So my first sponsee is no longer here.
Wow.
I got a phone call from his wife when I was 3 years sober, about 2 or 3 years sober. Ironically, I was at a poker tournament with a bunch of guys in the program.
Right.
So thank God I was around men when I got the phone call from his wife that she had found him dead in bed back home. And I was still sponsoring him, but I was trying to get him to get a new sponsor in Chicago.
Mm.
And he just never did it. And unfortunately, this took him. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Man. No, that's beautiful, man, and thank you for that. So what? And I know what. How long do you have? 14 years now.
Coming up on 14 years.
14
Yeah, I
years,
mean,
right?
don't front me yet. I got 13 years and February 1st. So I've got the rest of this month and one more month. So I'm less than 2 months from having 14 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice, man. And so I know that you, we met at a retreat, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I haven't asked anybody this yet, but what's your experience like at the retreats, right? What did you like so much about those retreats that you just kept going back,
Okay.
right?
So I'll give you two answers. I'll give you the why I hated them at first. So,
Okay.
so I used to go to the nights retreats, as I was telling Carlos earlier, back in the 2006-7 time frame.
Right.
As you know, by my sobriety date 2010, I wasn't sober at those retreats. Now, I was sober at the retreats, but I would drink and use in between them. So, as we
Right.
know with the nights, they give us a little name tag
Right.
with
Right.
our name and our sobriety date. And so I would get my sobriety date, and now I'm no longer going to the nights regularly, but I'm going to the retreats. And they say once a night, always a night. So I probably went to a handful of them with Ray. And each time in between, so in the spring, I'd have a sobriety date of whatever that was.
Right.
Then I'd come in the winter, and it'd be a new one. So by the third or fourth retreat, no kidding, whoever was doing name tags back then, the night guy, I can picture his face, but I can't remember his name. But I know Ray would know. He's like, he just looked at me. He'd go, because they would, you know how they put it in
Right.
a
Right. Right.
permanent.
Yeah.
Mine was still in marker because they just knew it would change, and so there was obviously some self-deprecation there. There was some embarrassment. There was a lot of stuff. I was ashamed. So every time I'd make that trek up to Prescott, not wanting to go, but wanting to go. Because, they
Right.
say once you get a taste of AA, there is that truth that they say at the end of the meeting that keep coming back. It works if you work it.
Right. Right.
That keep coming back is for all of us, but I really think that's essential for people who are in and out. Keep coming back.
Right.
It really does work if you work it. And so I think that was part of it. I wasn't wanting to go up to the retreat so I could tell everyone my new sobriety date, be embarrassed.
Right. Right.
There was something there I wanted, but I wasn't done drinking. And I always say, for me, just for this alcoholic, I was only done now having had years to look back at it until it stopped working. I believe in
Right.
drugs and alcohol need to stop working for
Mm-hmm.
me to bring God and the steps and the principles into this and fellowship.
Right.
And that's just my story. And so, anyway, real quickly on the nights. And so the guy looked at me this one time. He goes, "Let me guess, new date, or can we keep the new one and I can finally put it, permanent?" And I remember looking at him and I was like, I had to get honest. And I was like, "No, bro." He would go, "All right, bro, what is it?" And he'd make me a new one because they would keep it.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what I don't like about it
Right.
was that I wasn't getting much out of it other than relapsing and going to retreats and hanging out with dudes. Now, what I love about it. So when I got sober in 2010, I hadn't been to a night's retreat until, in fact, I just found the picture in 2011. Now, think about how cool that was. Now I had over a year. I could go, I could talk about how this was different. That felt good. I went with Ray. I went with this guy named Travis. I'll show you the picture after this.
Yeah.
But it was kind of cool. And then I started going to that retreat up in St. David with my sponsor. And I remember my sponsor, back then there was just one person that spoke all day. I was always reluctant, I will say this, Carlos, at the beginning, because even though I was in a much different place with my unity and with my fellowship, meaning I had found a group of men I wanted to know and I wanted to start, but I still had some hesitant. Oh, shoot, you wanna?
Oh,
God
yeah.
damn, sorry. You can just hit stop.
Okay.
So, sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
So, in short, I like my sponsor would make me do coffee after the meeting, meet before the meeting, all these extra things that I try to do with my guys when I notice that they don't want to connect. There are some people just love to right away connect. There's some people that don't, and I understand those personalities. Don't feel bad if you're like that, if you're not into socializing. But that's the whole point of recovery is you got to be uncomfortable about some of this stuff. Doesn't mean you have to go and talk. Just sit. But it's that sitting and listening, or after the meeting and sitting and listening, that you get so much more than you do even out of meetings.
Right.
And so I think it was a combination of making my sponsor making me go to things like potlucks at home groups, which I hated. But I reluctantly went. But here's what's funny: just like a meeting, I'd always come out of it happy. Man, that was a good. I got to go to more. Then the next one come up, and I'd not want to go. It was the same with retreats. At the beginning, I'd be like, "Man, there's no way I want to go to this." Just like we saw with some of the new guys that went up this last time, like Santana and those guys.
Right.
And I get it, but something switched, and now I wanted to go. And I think part of it was the confidence of being sober and now bringing up guys. Obviously, that always helps. One of my retreats, I think it was the second one, I was the main speaker. So on Saturday night, kind of like John, that was a little bit of an ego stroke, I'm not going to lie to you, but I had already shared my story numerous times in meetings, so I was confident. I was nervous as heck, though, but that was another reason why. And then I got onto the retreat committee like the next year, and then it just became a part of it. So the liking part of it is you have to get through that uncomfortable initial feeling. And then once you start realizing that really the thing I think I love the most about retreats today is it's 2.5 days where I get to just concentrate on other people and just getting away from this, right? Life, texting, work, my wife. I love them all. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful. This is what I got back in life. But there's something about putting that all down and just doing recovery. I mean, solid recovery. And even if we're not in the steps or someone speaking and we're just outside talking in the meeting hall, you and I both know it's still that aura that you
Right.
get
Yeah.
and the stories we get to share and laughter. And now, dude, I can't wait till the next one, right? Next year. So it's funny but that just doesn't happen over time. I've never met a newcomer or a first timer at a retreat that feels the way I just explained it.
Right. Yeah.
And so I want to end by saying that comes in time, just like everything does. A saying I want to say on this film today is 10 miles in the woods and 10 miles out. My sponsor told me early on that you took a lot of years to get your ass into those woods. You're not going to get out of them with 12 steps or your first sponsee or a year of sobriety. No, it will take time to come out because it took time to go in. And he also meant that for other people in our lives, like our wives or our girlfriends or our friends. You took those people in the woods with you. Just because you're on your way out, you're feeling good, you're going to retreats, you're hanging out with your friends, and your wife's still pissed off at you, guess what? You got to give her her time to come out.
Right.
And so I love that analogy of 10 miles in, 10 miles out, because you got to go in. And that's kind of like how retreats were. It took me a little while. Last thing I'll say is on the Knights retreat, 291 men, 126 were new timers this past weekend. That's a lot of men, probably like me, who didn't want nothing to do with that thing, dragged up by their sponsor, blah, blah, blah. And hopefully at one time or another, they will start to understand the benefits from it like I do today.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, man, I'm going to the next one for sure. Yeah, like I was saying before,
In May.
as soon as I found out, like everybody, all my friends were going, I was like,
Yeah.
man, I want to go, but I hadn't called off work, the funds, all this stuff, but yeah, I definitely want to go. So I haven't been to a nice retreat in a while, but yeah, man,
They're
I'll
special.
ask you. Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They are. I'll ask you one more question,
Okay.
and we'll kind of wrap it up because
Okay.
I know that it's getting a little bit late. But what is something that you have been living by lately or like a favorite quote or something that you've recently read or something that you've recently heard at a meeting that you have been living by lately?
That's a good one, Carlos. So, like I've been answering your questions, not to ever not want to go direct, there's a story that leads to my answer. So, one of the things I want to tell people with long term sobriety and people who have short term is that I miss short term sobriety, and I'll tell you why. Because you're on fire, right? You're on fire, man. You're just excited. Just reminiscing with you today on this, I can remember that 6 months. I can remember that first year. I can remember my first retreat. Even though I hated these first retreats, there was just something about that first couple years. My wife was excited I was doing this, but at the same time, obviously, she needed help with the babies because our kids were still very young. She told me when I had some time sober that she said, I missed when you would go in and out, like relapse. And there's a couple things I'll share, and then I'll get to that great question of what am I living by today? And I looked at her and I said, what are you talking about? You miss me going out. And she goes, well, I don't miss you going out. Like, I don't miss that part. Right. I miss the Alex the day after. Now, I had about 4 or 5 years at the time, so I was, sponsoring guys. There was a time when, this isn't bragging, I think I shot my thing. I had like 6 or 7 guys in the steps. It was a lot. I was constantly out. And she said, I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, when you used to relapse or do the things you did, you doted on me. You would come back and you would bring me flowers. You rub my back. You would cook dinner. You would help me with the kids. You would do all this kind of. And I said, yeah, because I felt guilty, and I wanted to make up for it. She goes, I know that's why. Right. She goes, but there was something in you, though, this generosity, this genuine thing about you that just really meant it, though, right. too. Yeah. And I was like, man, you're right. And I said, what am I missing right here about this? She goes, it's not that you're not, sweetie. Like, I'm happy you're sober, and look at our lives. It's gotten better, and we're not not everything's an emergency. But what she reminded me of is that balance, that opportunity that when we get our lives back, let's not forget who went through the shit with us. Because it's so easy to say, Carlos will call me when I'm 2 minutes from the house and say, hey, bro, I need you because I'm thinking about using, and I'll make a U-turn and come right to Carlos. But if I'm 2 minutes from the house and my wife says, hey, sweetie, I hope you're not home yet. I need milk from the store. That I'm going, motherfucker, I don't have time for this. Yeah. See how, and I think that's what I caught on to was that basically I'm treating people in AA better than I'm treating her. Right. So I share that story because there's balance in this, right? So that's to the newcomers that are new, whether they're in their first year or they're starting to get it, or even where you're at, don't forget how you got here. Who stood by you. Even though you still need us, there's people that were here before us. Right. That said, now you have that longer term. And once I hit over 10 years, what I realized is now I know why people who do go out, and it happens often. I had a guy just last year, Mike Z, that went out after 12 years. He got sober and when I got sober, he died of fentanyl. So imagine that, right? That you can have good time, go out one time. That's all it took. One time, he's gone now. And but I realized that you start to accumulate things. And it's not just nice things like this place you got. Before you know it, now you got your own house. Now you have a family. Now you have kids. Now you have maybe a better job, maybe a different job. It doesn't matter. You accumulate trust. You accumulate people who are now back in your life.
Right.
There's basically, my point is sometimes it's really hard when I talk about this or I'm telling you this story to even remember that Alex in my 30s or in my 20s because, man, I'm this person. I'm like, was that really me? Yeah, it was. So I say that what I've done recently is, first of all, I've realized to never take advantage of the time you have. We still got today. And so that's why God brought these three guys this last 6 months. I lost my job earlier this year. This is from context to this. And I've never lost my job in sobriety. And I hate to say it, even when I was using, I would lose my job, but there was a reason. So what happened and what I'm working on today are a couple things, Carlos. First is I realized that sobriety still comes first. You know, back to basics. We hear that a lot in AA. Man, let me tell you something. No matter how much time you got to still keep your sobriety first. And so what happened when I lost my job is a lot of people were asking me why I wasn't more mad. You know what my answer was to them? Because, bro, if you knew my life, losing my job is nothing compared to what I've been sharing for the last hour and a half with you. Yeah. Let me tell you what I've gone through with God's help, bro. Right. This is nothing. And what I meant, and I remember saying, like I was scared, I'm not going to lie, when you lose your job, right? You got a mortgage to pay, you got cars. Now, thank God I've managed my money somewhat decent, but I don't have a lot of money saved. I'll be honest, Carlos, I'm 54 years old. I didn't start accumulating stuff until about, 5 or 6 years ago. I was still playing catch up, 10 miles in the woods, 10 miles out. So now I got a brand new built house in Queen Creek. I got a daughter with, I'm paying her tuition to U of A. Won't get into it, ain't cheap. Minus her scholarships. I got a young daughter. So the fear, right? The fear, you just talked about your fear not getting that job. Right. It's this kind of, it says in step 9 how those promises come to us. And one of them is security and finances. Mm-hmm. But guess what? It also goes away. Those bedevilments come back in sobriety as well. Right. And I started, and that came to me. But you know what though, bro? This all ties in because I looked at God and I remember praying every day, and I started going to more meetings, and I started to sink into my program, and I went a month without a job. I went 2 months without a job. I went 3 months without a job. Trust me, I was worrying. Yeah. It had been a long time. I got so many no's like you got from the bank. And but I kept faith, man. I was like, God's got this. Because why? Because from that time I overdosed in 94 until the time I got sober, there is a part of my story I haven't shared with you, but I nearly died from a health problem I had in 2016 sober, like should have died. I'm here. So all these things that have come to me, what's going to make this different? Right. And that was my answer to people who were wondering why I wasn't more stressed, more upset. Because I said, I don't know when it'll happen. And there were times I was like, okay, God, enough's enough. But I knew it would. So what I'm living by today is a lot of my early sobriety methodologies and promises. And that is stick with God, stick with the winners, pray every day. I wanted to get back into the steps, and God granted 3 guys right now. Back to the basics, man. Nothing changes, but everything changes, right. And I think now, I ended up getting a job, and I'll close with this. It turned out that when I look back at this year, I got fired right before my kids all came home for the summer. My wife's a school teacher, so I include her. I got hired right after they were all going back to school. And I remember praying to God one day, and I said, thank you for letting me have time for them this summer with them. It was funny because I don't know what the message was, but when I got this new job, I remembered, I looked back, and the entire summer they were home. I was home with them. Now, I was doing interviews trying to get a job, but there was more to that. And that's my thing I'll close with is always look deeper in. Get out of that selfishness and that self-centeredness and look at what God was really trying to give you. And you always find out the message after you went through it. It's never through it that you're going to get the message. It's when you're done that you look back and you say, I get it now. But you got to be open-minded to that. That's why it says to be open-minded, willing, and honest. And thank God for that. And thank God I still have that. So that's why I live by today, man, is a lot of the back to basics kind of newcomer mentality because I needed to get through what I went through this year.
Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely.
That was beautiful. And I'm so glad I got to do this. And I'm so glad that I am doing this because, right, we see each other at retreats and we see each other at
That's right.
meetings, but
Yes.
we never, it's always surface level
Yeah.
conversations, right?
Yeah.
Of course, we get personal and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but I don't know, there's just something about like having one-on-one time.
This
right?
is
Like,
deep, bro.
Aside from making a video, aside from like, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just awesome to get to know people's stories
Yeah.
and see their perspective on things so it's beautiful, man. So I want to thank you
Absolutely.
so much
Thank
for doing
you,
this with me,
Carlos.
man. And
It's very cathartic. I feel like I just shared my story, but did it with you intimately. But at the same time, I hope this helps others because, I'll close with this. This is a deadly disease. More of us die from this than live.
right.
So take this seriously because truthfully, I am lucky to be here today, as I know you are.
Right.
And I told a guy over the retreat who can't stand in and out,
Yeah.
I said, you need to stop thinking about all the reasons why you are in and out and realize right at this moment, you're on the right side of the street.
Right.
Stay here. What do they say? Stay. You don't have to go back out. That's a choice you get to make at this point going forward.
Right.
Oh, no, but it's a disease and they tell me I can. Yeah, I believe that. But you have all the things you have right here to help you not have to do that. That's what I mean by the choice.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you for this, Carlos, because this allowed me to get deep, to get personal, and also remember what it was like and how grateful I am today. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Cool.